The silence after takeoff. The cabin lights are dimmed, not dark, just low enough to soften faces. A stewardess moves slowly down the aisle, one hand resting against the tops of the seats to steady herself as the aircraft vibrates beneath her feet. The plane is still at the gate, engines idling, that low, mechanical breathing sound that fills the chest if you listen long enough. She carries the passenger manifest folded once, creased from being checked and rechecked. Names, seat numbers, destinations. She does this route often. She knows the rhythm. She knows when to glance up, when to smile, when not to interrupt the small private rituals people perform before a flight. The way some passengers close their eyes as if in prayer, the way others grip the armrests before anything has even begun. Halfway down the aisle, her eyes slow. She stops walking. It isn't panic, not yet, just a pause, a hesitation so slight no one notices. A ticket number, printed cleanly, no smudge, no correction, but something about it doesn't belong. She turns the page back, scans again from the top, counts seats, counts rows. She exhales through her nose and keeps moving. Passengers are still settling in. A man in the aisle seat lifts a coat into the overhead compartment. It brushes the metal frame, producing a dull, hollow thud. Somewhere behind her, a child asks a question that goes unanswered. Seatbelts click, one after another, soft, metallic confirmations. The stewardess reaches the next row and checks the manifest again, now holding it closer to her chest, angling it slightly away from the passenger's eyes. Row 17. Occupied, both seats, but according to the manifest, only one ticket was issued. She looks up. The passenger by the window stares straight ahead, headphones on, jaw tight. The other leans toward the aisle, flipping through a magazine already bent at the spine. They don't look at her. She doesn't speak. She marks nothing, says nothing, moves on. The cabin groan grows deeper as the aircraft prepares to push back. The sound changes subtly, less idle, more intention. People feel it before they understand it. A murmur passes through the rows, not words, just sound, the collective noise of bodies settling into shared confinement. The stewardess reaches the rear galley and stops. She folds the manifest again, unfolds it. Her finger traces the line one more time. The ticket number is there. It has a name attached to it. A name she heard earlier. She remembers because it stood out. Not unusual, not traumatic, just spoken too clearly, too confidently, as if it expected to be acknowledged. She had been near the cockpit when one of the air attendants mentioned it quietly. "Did you see?" The rest was lost under the rising engine noise. She hadn't asked for clarification. She rarely does. Questions on planes have a way of spreading. The stewardess turns and looks back down the aisle. The lights reflect faintly off the curved ceiling panels. Faces glow pale and tired. A man coughs, once sharp and dry, and presses his lips together as if embarrassed by the sound. She feels it then. Not fear. Displacement, the sense that something has been placed slightly out of alignment. The captain's voice crackles briefly over the intercom, not speaking yet, just a test burst of static, a reminder that the cockpit exists, sealed off, separate. She takes a breath and steps forward again. This time she stops at row 22. An elderly woman looks up at her with a polite, practiced smile, the kind that expects nothing more than a nod. "Excuse me," the stewardess says quietly. "May I see your boarding pass?" The woman hands it over without question. The stewardess checks it. Correct seat, correct name, correct number. But the number sits uncomfortably close to the one she's been circling in her mind. She hands it back. "Thank you." As she turns away, the woman speaks. "I think there's someone sitting near me who isn't supposed to be here." The words are not accusatory, they're observational, as if commenting on the weather. The stewardess stops. "Pardon?" The woman nods slightly toward the aisle seat across from her. "He said my husband's name, but my husband didn't make this flight." The stewardess follows her gaze. The man across the aisle meets her eyes immediately, too quickly. "I was mistaken. I thought she was someone else." His voice is calm, steady, the kind of voice that has learned not to invite further scrutiny. The stewardess holds his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiles, thin, professional. "It happens," she says. She moves on. Behind her, the engines increase in pitch. The aircraft begins to roll backwards. A low vibration passes through the floor, up through the soles of her shoes. The manifest feels heavier now. She reaches the forward galley again, just as the captain's voice fills the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard." The words are familiar, reassuring, designed to smooth edges. As the speech continues, the stewardess steps into the galley and lowers her voice, speaking to another attendant. "Have you checked the final count?" "Yes," the other replies. "Everything matches." "Everything?" The attendant nods. "All accounted for." The stewardess looks down at the folded manifest in her hands. She doesn't argue. The plane turns onto the runway. The lights outside blur into long, trembling lines. A few passengers grip armrests now, others lean back, eyes closed. The engines roar. Acceleration presses bodies into seats. Loose items rattle softly in overhead bins. A pen rolls, stops, rolls again. The stewardess takes her jump seat and straps in. As the plane lifts, the sound changes suddenly from roar to something thinner, more distant. The ground releases them. There is a moment, brief and weightless, when everything seems suspended. And then, silence. Not complete silence, just the absence of something expected. No conversation, no coughing, no rustling pages. The stewardess realizes she is holding her breath. She releases it slowly. Across the cabin, a man whispers a name. Not loudly, not urgently, just once. It is the same name printed beside the strange ticket number. The stewardess closes her eyes. She does not look at the manifest again. Later, much later, when this flight is spoken about, when transcripts are reviewed and audio is analyzed frame by frame, this moment will not be mentioned. There will be no official record of a whisper, no notation of unease, only numbers, times, altitudes. But in this sealed file, reopened now, the silence after takeoff is preserved, marked, noted, and waiting. A case not meant for the public. File 004 was never scheduled for release. There is no memo authorizing it, no declassification date, no signature at the bottom of the page granting permission. It exists in the archive the way certain memories exist in families, present, acknowledged, but never spoken aloud. When the file was first logged, it was marked incomplete. That designation was never removed, not because the investigation was ongoing, but because no one could say with confidence that it had ever truly begun. The folder itself is unremarkable, gray, thin, corners softened from handling. On the tab, written in block letters that lean slightly to the right, is the number 004. Nothing else. No title. That omission alone is unusual. Most files, even sensitive ones, carry at least a provisional label, a date, a location, a name, something to anchor the record to reality. File 004 does not. Inside, the documents are inconsistent. Different fonts, different formatting standards, some typed, some handwritten, some clearly copied from other reports, then altered, lines struck through, margins crowded with notes that trail off mid-thought. Several pages are redacted so aggressively that only prepositions remain. Of, and, before. The first report opens with a sentence that never finishes. Following the events of, the rest of the line is blacked out. Below it, a space where a signature should be. Blank. No initials, no stamp, no indication of who submitted it or why. That absence repeats throughout the file. Names appear, then vanish. Statements are referenced but not attached. Evidence logs list items without descriptions. One page notes an audio recording. Another page states that no such recording exists. They are separated by less than an hour. The timestamps are precise, the conclusions are not. Investigators who handled File 004 did not refuse to work on it. That distinction matters. There were no formal objections, no recorded complaints, no transfers requested. Instead, there was avoidance. Meetings postponed, calls unanswered, reports delayed just long enough to cool urgency into discomfort. One senior analyst, interviewed years later for an unrelated audit, paused when asked about it. "I remember the number," he said. "I remember not liking how it felt to say it out loud." When pressed, he could not articulate why. Another investigator, whose handwriting appears on at least 4 pages in the file, crossed out her own notes repeatedly. The pressure of the pen increases with each revision. By the final entry, the paper is nearly torn. Her last margin note reads simply, "Leave this alone." It is underlined twice. There is no indication that she was overruled. The case did not stall because of missing evidence. It stalled because no one seemed willing to decide what counted as evidence in the first place. Witness statements are present, but incomplete. One passenger recalls hearing a name spoken during ascent. Another insists there was no such sound, only the engines and the seatbelt chime. A third describes a pause that made him check his watch, though his watch shows no irregularity. A crew attendant reports an issue with the manifest. Her statement ends abruptly mid-sentence, as if interrupted. The continuation page is blank. No explanation is offered. In the margins of that blank page, someone has written a question mark. It is small, almost apologetic. There is a section labeled Crew Accounts. It contains 2 pages. Both are heavily redacted. What remains are fragments. Could not reconcile. Felt incorrect. No protocol for. The final line is intact. We proceeded as instructed. By whom, the file does not say. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is not what is missing, but what is present. A checklist. Routine, mechanical, boxes ticked with care. Passenger count verified, cabin secured, communications nominal. Beside passenger count verified, someone has added a small notation in a different pen. See attached. There is no attachment. The investigators assigned to File 004 were not inexperienced. Many had handled mass casualty events, disappearances, accidents with clear causes and devastating outcomes. They were familiar with grief, with chaos, with the human need to assign blame or meaning. This was different. One internal email, preserved accidentally in a server backup, captures the tone better than any formal report. "I don't know what we're looking for, and I don't know how we'll know when we found it." That email was never replied to. In later correspondence, the same sender requests reassignment. The assignment is denied without comment. He remains on the case until the file is sealed. The sealing itself is quiet. No announcement, no press interest, no public-facing explanation. The file is moved from an active cabinet to long-term storage. Its access level is downgraded. Its digital counterpart is fragmented. Some scans uploaded, others left as physical copies only. Why seal a case without resolution? The official rationale cites procedural inconsistencies and insufficient corroboration. Unofficially, those who handled it describe something else: reluctance. A sense that examining the details too closely would require conclusions no one was prepared to write down. There is a handwritten note tucked between 2 reports, not referenced anywhere else. The ink has faded slightly, as if exposed to light too long. It reads, "This does not behave like an error." No author, no date, just that sentence. People who worked adjacent to File 004, administrators, archivists, assistants, often claim they knew nothing about it. And yet, when asked directly, several recall small things: a conversation that stopped when someone entered the room, a box that was moved twice without explanation, a feeling that certain questions were unwelcome. One junior clerk recalls being told gently to forget the number. He laughs when recounting it, then stops laughing. "I don't remember who said it, I just remember agreeing." Human hesitation is difficult to quantify, but it leaves traces. It appears in delayed timestamps, in overwritten notes, in language that circles a point without touching it. File 004 is full of such language, words like uncertain, irregular, anomalous, words that describe without accusing, words that create distance. There are no conclusions at the end of the file, no summary, no recommendations. Instead, there is a final page labeled Status. The entry reads, Unresolved. Below it, someone has added in a different hand, intentionally. That addition is not signed. When the file was sealed, it was done under a broader directive concerning non-actionable investigations. The wording is vague enough to apply to almost anything, but File 004 is the only case in that batch without a public-facing counterpart. No press release, no summary report, no sanitized explanation. It simply disappears, and yet it remains, preserved in the archive, cataloged, numbered, as if waiting for someone willing to sit with the discomfort it contains. This chapter does not open the case to solve it. It opens it to acknowledge the silence around it, to recognize the human instinct to step back when something refuses to fit. In the chapters that follow, we will move carefully, not towards answers, but towards understanding why certain questions were never asked aloud. Because File 004 was not sealed to protect the public, it was sealed to protect those who looked at it too closely. And even now, reopening it feels like an intrusion, not into a mystery, but into a hesitation that has been held quietly for too long.
The city that morning was unremarkable. That is important. It was not a place bracing for disaster, not a city holding its breath. It moved the way cities always move when nothing is expected to happen. Traffic lights cycled, buses sighed to a stop, storefronts lifted their shutters without ceremony. The year matters less than the feeling of it. This was a time before constant alerts, before phones vibrated with news every few minutes. Information arrived on paper, folded and tucked under arms. Voices came from radios on kitchen counters. The day revealed itself slowly. At the airport, routine was a kind of comfort. Glass doors slid open and closed with the same muted sigh. The floor reflected overhead lights in long, pale streaks. Everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. People arrived early, not out of anxiety, but habit. Business travelers moved with practiced efficiency, jackets over arms, briefcases worn smooth at the corners. They knew which security line moved faster, which cafe poured the strongest coffee. They did not look up often. Families arrived heavier, slower, hands full, bags mismatched, children trailing behind, distracted by everything, the echo of footsteps, the reflections in the windows, the impossible size of the aircraft parked outside. A child ran briefly through the waiting area, shoes flashing, before a parent called them back. The sound carried, then dissolved into the larger noise of the terminal. Near the gates, newspapers were stacked in uneven columns. Headlines spoke of politics, weather, small market fluctuations. Nothing urgent, nothing that would be remembered. Someone folded a paper neatly after finishing a crossword. Another circled a headline in pen, planning to mention it later in conversation. Coffee cups were lifted, set down, lifted again. Sleeves slid down cardboard holders. Sugar packets were torn open with careful fingers. These details do not appear in official reports. They are not logged or archived, but they are what the day was made of.
The airport staff moved through it all with a familiarity that bordered on invisibility. Uniforms crisp, expressions neutral. They had done this yesterday. They would do it tomorrow. Announcements echoed overhead, slightly distorted by the acoustics. Gate changes, boarding times, polite reminders delivered in calm, practiced voices. People listened with half their attention. A man glanced at the departure board, then back to his watch. A woman adjusted the strap of her bag, shifting its weight from one shoulder to the other. There were small irritations, a delayed connection, a long line at security, a vending machine that took a coin and refused to return it. No one wrote those down. Near one of the airport cafes, two co-workers stood at a tall table, speaking quietly about a meeting they would rather not attend. One of them laughed softly, then stopped, suddenly aware of the space around them. At another gate, a couple argued in whispers. The words were not clear, only the tone, tired, restrained. They stopped when boarding was announced, conflict postponed rather than resolved. This was a city of routine, and routine dulls perception. People notice what breaks pattern, not the pattern itself. They trust that what has always worked will continue to work. That manifests in small ways: stepping onto an escalator without looking at the steps, handing over a boarding pass without checking the name. Normality is efficient. The airport relied on that efficiency. Systems layered on top of systems, procedures refined over years, then trusted implicitly. Most passengers never questioned it. They assumed that if they were allowed through the gate, everything else had already been checked, that someone, somewhere had verified the details. The truth is quieter. Verification is human, and humans carry assumptions. At the time, security procedures were thorough but not yet obsessive. Shoes stayed on, liquids passed through, names were scanned, not scrutinized. The manifest was a document, not a mystery. Air travel still held a sense of formality, even optimism. Flying was tiring but not yet heavy with suspicion. People dressed as if it mattered how they appeared at 30,000 feet. A man adjusted his tie before boarding. A woman reapplied lipstick using the dark reflection of the window. Someone joked about legroom. Someone else complained about it. The aircraft itself waited patiently at the gate, door open, interior lit softly. It had flown this route many times before. Its systems were familiar to the crew, its sounds predictable. There is comfort in predictability. Inside the cabin, overhead bins stood open like empty mouths. Seat fabric showed faint wear, the kind that comes from thousands of ordinary journeys. A flight attendant straightened a safety card that had slipped halfway out of its pocket. Another checked a row for trash, then moved on. They spoke to each other in shorthand, a language built from repetition. None of them expected anything unusual. The passengers did not expect it either. They carried their own small concerns, a presentation, a reunion, a quiet hope for an empty seat beside them. They did not study each other closely. A man reading by the window, a woman already asleep, someone tapping a foot, impatient for departure. Minor oddities, if they appeared, passed without comment. A seat taken earlier than expected, a bag placed in the wrong compartment, a name misheard. These things happen every day. Human perception filters constantly, discarding what does not demand attention. It is how people move through crowded spaces without becoming overwhelmed. Only later, when something goes wrong, do those discarded details return. A witness says, "I didn't think anything of it at the time." That phrase appears often in investigations. It is not an admission of guilt or negligence, it is an acknowledgement of normalcy. At the moment, there was nothing to react to. The city outside the airport continued as usual. Offices filled, phones rang, lunch plans were made. Somewhere downtown a clock struck the hour, somewhere else a shopkeeper flipped a sign from closed to open. Life advanced in small, unremarkable increments. By the time boarding began in earnest, the airport had already begun to forget the people passing through it. Seats emptied, cups were cleared, newspapers were left behind. The airport absorbed it all and prepared for the next wave. This is how context works. It does not announce itself, it surrounds. And when something later feels wrong, deeply wrong, it is against this backdrop that the contrast becomes unbearable. Because nothing in the city of routine prepared anyone for irregularity. No alarms sounded, no warnings were issued, no one paused long enough to sense what could not yet be named. They moved forward, trusting the systems, trusting each other, trusting that the ordinary would remain so. And in that trust, the smallest deviations went unnoticed, not because people were careless, but because the day had given them no reason to look closer. Not yet.
The first cracks did not announce themselves. They rarely do. They appeared as small inconveniences, the kind that occurs so often in transit spaces that they are absorbed without comment. A delay of seconds, a misheard instruction, a moment of uncertainty resolved by moving on. In the records, these moments are scattered, unconnected, easy to dismiss. Only later do they gather weight. One of the earliest appears in a ticketing log, time-stamped just after dawn. An irregular purchase, paid in full, no errors flagged by the system. The destination matched the flight. The seat assignment did not. It fell outside the normal sequence. Not impossible, just unusual. The system corrected nothing. Neither did the agent. There was no alert demanding attention, no red box, no audible warning. The ticket was printed, the transaction closed. A ground staff supervisor would later review the log and pause briefly on that entry. She would think she remembered something about that morning, then she would move on, distracted by another task. Memory, like procedure, favors efficiency. At the boarding gate, passengers lined up in loose order. Groups called forward, others waited, standing slightly too close to the rope barrier, eager to be next. A man stepped forward when his group was called, then hesitated, glancing back as if checking whether someone else should be with him. He said nothing. He scanned his boarding pass and moved on. No one stopped him. Another passenger approached the gate agent with a quiet question. His seat number, he said, didn't seem right. The agent smiled, glanced at the screen, and assured him it was fine. It usually was. A child tugged at a parent's sleeve, pointing toward the aircraft. The parent nodded absently, eyes on their phone. Behind them, a woman clutched her boarding pass with both hands. She folded it, unfolded it, folded it again. When it was her turn, she presented it quickly, as if afraid of hesitation. Her ID matched the name. The agent waved her through. Still, the agent would later remember her, not because she did anything wrong, because she looked relieved to be allowed to proceed. Inside the jet bridge, the sound changed. The open terminal fell away, replaced by the hollow echo of footsteps and the distant hum of the aircraft. A flight attendant stood near the door, greeting passengers. She repeated the same phrase dozens of times, her voice steady, practiced. "Welcome aboard." At some point, she noticed a gap, not an empty space, a moment, a pause between passengers that felt slightly longer than it should have. She glanced down the jet bridge, expecting to see someone approaching. No one was there. Then the next passenger appeared, slightly out of breath, apologizing softly for the delay. The attendant nodded and continued. These are the moments that do not survive into official narratives. A seat, unexpectedly vacant during an initial count, then filled before anyone can question it. A head count repeated, numbers aligning just enough to satisfy protocol. One crew member thought she miscounted. Another assumed a passenger was in the restroom. No one wanted to be the person who stopped boarding over a feeling. Feelings are not actionable. During cabin preparation, a flight attendant noticed a bag placed in an overhead compartment far from its owner. She asked nearby passengers whose it was. A man claimed it without meeting his eyes. She accepted the answer. She would later write in a personal notebook, not included in the file, that she wished she had asked again. Not because the bag was dangerous, because the exchange had felt incomplete. In row 14, a seat remained empty longer than expected. The manifest listed it as occupied. The boarding system showed the passenger had scanned in. A junior attendant flagged it quietly. The lead attendant checked the manifest, then the cabin, then the manifest again. "Maybe they're running late," she said, "or in the restroom." Boarding was nearly complete. They left the seat unoccupied and moved on.
A few rows back, a passenger watched the exchange with mild curiosity. He would later tell investigators that he assumed the seat belonged to a no-show. He said, "They always have a few." That assumption settled easily. In another section of the cabin, a man appeared visibly nervous. His hands shook as he stowed his bag. He kept glancing toward the aisle, then toward the front of the plane. A flight attendant asked if he was all right. "Fine," he said too quickly. "Just tired." She smiled and passed on. Nervousness is common on planes. Fear of flying, fear of arrival, fear of what waits on the other side of the flight. It is not a crime. At least one passenger noticed that the name spoken by the attendant during a brief exchange did not match the name printed on the boarding pass visible in her hand. He assumed he had misheard. The engines were loud, the cabin echoed. He turned back to his magazine. These early warning signs did not align into a pattern at the time. They existed as isolated impressions, each too small to demand escalation. More importantly, they carried plausible explanations. Human systems depend on plausibility. They allow operations to continue. One crew member would later describe the feeling as static, not noise, not danger, interference, a low-level resistance in the mind when checking details that should have been simple. She said, like reading the same sentence twice and still not being sure what it said. She did not report that sensation. She did not know how. There is a reluctance, especially in professional environments, to voice uncertainty without evidence, to admit that something feels wrong without being able to explain why. It risks embarrassment. It risks being dismissed. One ground staffer recalls starting to pick up a phone, then stopping. She looked at the departure board, saw that the flight was on schedule, and set the phone back down. "What would I even say?" she later asked. That question appears often in retrospect. As the doors closed and the aircraft prepared to depart, the cracks remained, unaddressed but not entirely unseen. They existed in glances exchanged between crew members, in brief pauses before checking boxes, in the subtle tension of people who sensed misalignment but could not locate its source. Nothing had gone wrong, not yet. And so the mechanisms of routine carried the flight forward. When investigators later reconstructed the timeline, they marked these moments carefully. They circled them, annotated them. They asked why no one acted sooner. The answer is not negligence. It is hesitation, human instinct to doubt oneself before doubting the system, to admit that error lies in perception rather than structure. By the time something unmistakably wrong occurred, these early signs would be reinterpreted as warnings, but in the moment, they were just omissions, small ones, the kind that slip through unnoticed, the kind that only become questions after the fact. And by then, the opportunity to ask them has already passed.
What follows is not a complete record. It cannot be. The timeline was assembled from fragments, logs that survived, statements given years apart, memories softened or sharpened by time. There are gaps no reconstruction can close. Still, this is as close as the archive allows us to come. 00. Boarding complete. The doors close with a muted finality, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft mechanical seal. Inside the cabin, the air feels heavier now, recycled, familiar to anyone who flies often, a blend of fabric, plastic, and faint disinfectant. Passengers settle. Bags are adjusted under seats. Someone shifts repeatedly, unable to get comfortable. A flight attendant walks the aisle, checking seatbelts with her eyes rather than her hands. She pauses at row 14. The seat that should be occupied is empty. She notes it mentally and moves on. 0003. Safety demonstration. The routine gestures begin. Hands pointing, seatbelts demonstrated, oxygen masks mimed with careful calm. Most passengers do not watch. One man does. He watches intently, eyes following every movement. When the attendant meets his gaze, he looks away.
In the galley, another attendant whispers, "Did you see?" The sentence ends there. The engines begin to rise and pitch. 0007. Pushback. The aircraft moves backward. A low vibration runs through the cabin floor. A child laughs, delighted by the sensation. A parent shushes them gently. Someone coughs. Another clears their throat. In the cockpit, a checklist is read aloud. Confirmations are exchanged. Everything sounds normal. On the manifest, the extra ticket remains unresolved. 0011. Taxi. The plane rolls slowly toward the runway. Outside, lights drift past the windows in soft, trembling lines. A flight attendant performs a headcount. She counts once, then again. She arrives at the same number. It matches the manifest. She does not understand how. She writes nothing down. 0016. Takeoff clearance. The captain's voice comes over the intercom, calm, even, reassuring. Passengers lean back slightly, bracing instinctively. The engines surge. Acceleration presses bodies into seats. A pen slips from a pocket and rolls, stopping against a shoe. The empty seat in row 14 remains empty. No one is sitting there. 0018. Liftoff. The ground releases. There is a brief moment of weightlessness, followed by the steady climb. Conversation fades, not intentionally. It simply falls away, replaced by the sustained roar of ascent. A man whispers a name. Only once. The woman beside him does not respond. 0021. Initial climb. The seatbelt sign remains on. The cabin is quiet now, subdued by altitude and engine noise. In the forward galley, a flight attendant checks the manifest again. Her finger traces the numbers. She stops. The extra ticket, the name beside it. She feels a tightening in her chest. Not fear exactly, something closer to responsibility. She considers calling the cockpit. She does not. What would she say? 0024. First crew exchange. Two attendants stand close together near the rear. Did you notice the... Yes. Do we... Wait. They separate as a passenger looks up. Smiles return. Professionalism reasserts itself. The moment passes. 0028. Seatbelt sign off. A soft chime. People shift. A few stand to retrieve items. A line forms for the restroom. A man walks down the aisle, pauses near row 14, then continues without comment. Someone else glances at the empty seat, then looks away. Absence is easy to ignore when it does not demand explanation. 0031. Beverage preparation. Carts are unlocked. The clink of bottles and cups fills the aisle. A flight attendant stops abruptly. Her cart has bumped into something. Nothing visible. She steadies it, frowns briefly, and continues. Later she will say the resistance felt wrong, too solid for air, too brief for a person. No mark is found on the cart. 0035. Communication gap. A call is placed from the cabin to the cockpit. What is said is unclear. The audio recording that should capture it does not exist. There is a log entry noting crew inquiry. No details follow. In the cockpit, the captain responds with a brief acknowledgement. No action is taken. 0039. Mid-cabin incident. A passenger reports feeling unwell, not dramatic, just dizzy, lightheaded. An attendant kneels beside him, speaking softly. As she does, she hears something behind her. A voice, low, familiar. She turns. No one is there. The passenger insists he heard nothing. She finishes assisting him and stands slowly, scanning the aisle. Everything looks as it should. Except it does not feel that way. 0044. Recount. Another headcount. Another match.
The numbers align perfectly now. Too perfectly. One attendant later describes this moment as the worst, because it meant whatever was wrong wasn't wrong on paper anymore. 0047. Altitude reached. The engines settle into a steady hum. The cabin lights adjust. People relax. They believe the hardest part is over. In the galley, an attendant finally picks up the phone to the cockpit. She hesitates before speaking. "There's something I can't account for." Silence on the line. "Be specific," the captain says. She cannot. She apologizes. The call ends. 0052. Lost recording. From this point forward, several systems logs are incomplete. A data packet is missing. No explanation is provided. Maintenance later reports no fault. Investigators mark the gap and move on. They have learned that some absences cannot be forced to explain themselves. 0058. Crew tension. The cabin crew continues their duties, but something has shifted. Movements are more deliberate. Glances linger longer than necessary. One attendant avoids looking at row 14 altogether. Another keeps checking it, as if expecting it to change. It does not. 0104. Passenger observation. A passenger presses the call button. When an attendant arrives, he lowers his voice. "I think there's someone sitting next to me who wasn't there before." The attendant looks. The seat is empty. She says nothing for a moment, then gently, "Sir, you're alone." He nods, embarrassed. "Sorry," he says. "I must be tired." She agrees too quickly. 0109. Guilt. In her jump seat, a flight attendant stares at her hands. She thinks of the moment she chose not to call earlier. She tells herself it was the right decision. She does not believe it. 0115. Mid-flight stability. By all measurable standards, the flight is normal. Speed, altitude, course, nothing demands intervention. And yet, the crew moves as if waiting for something. They do not know what, only that it has not finished with them. 0122. Silence. For a full minute, no one speaks. Not passengers, not crew, just the engines, the air. It is later noted because it stands out so starkly in witness recollections. An unnatural quiet inside a crowded cabin. Then a cough breaks it. The moment dissolves. 0130. End of record. The timeline continues beyond this point, but not in a way that can be reliably reconstructed. Statements diverge, memories conflict. What remains consistent is this. By the time the flight reaches the midpoint of its journey, the crew is no longer searching for an explanation. They are bracing. For what, they cannot say. Every second counted, and still none of them were enough to name what was happening, only to feel it, and to carry that feeling long after the aircraft touched down.
There is a moment in every investigation when hindsight sharpens, when scattered impressions collapse into a single, unbearable realization. For File 004, that moment centers on the count. Not a crash, not a scream, not an alarm, a number. The official passenger count matched the manifest. It did so repeatedly. That fact appears again and again in the records, underlined, circled, defended. It is the spine of the official explanation, the reassurance offered to supervisors, to regulators, to anyone who asked. The count balanced. But the people on the aircraft remember something else. They remember bodies. They remember faces. They remember the feeling that the space inside the cabin did not match the numbers written down. This is where things went wrong. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, through a series of human decisions made under pressure, fatigue, and the powerful assumption that systems do not lie. The first discrepancy was small. One extra ticket, one name without a seat that made sense. It was noticed, it was acknowledged, and then it was set aside because nothing concrete followed it. No missing person, no duplicate identity, no clear violation of procedure. The count still balanced. Later, when a seat appeared empty longer than expected, the assumption filled the gap. A restroom visit, a late boarder, a simple miscount corrected by the next pass through the aisle. The count balanced again. Each time someone felt the urge to question it, that urge collided with something heavier: responsibility. Calling attention to a discrepancy carries consequences. It delays departures. It invites scrutiny. It suggests failure, even when no fault is clear. So people hesitated. They checked again instead of escalating. They trusted that if the numbers aligned, their unease must be mistaken. That trust is not negligence. It is training. A flight attendant later described it as standing on a scale that tells you your weight is normal, even though you feel dizzy. You don't accuse the scale. You sit down, you breathe, you assume the feeling will pass. But the feeling did not pass. As the flight progressed, the mismatch between what was felt and what was recorded grew harder to ignore. Crew members began comparing impressions in fragments. "Did you see that man?" "Which one?" "Never mind." They spoke in half questions, unfinished sentences. They avoided direct statements, as if clarity itself might make the problem real. No one wanted to be wrong. No one wanted to be the person who disrupted everything over a suspicion they could not prove. By the time the second full recount matched the manifest again, relief should have followed. Instead, dread settled in. One attendant wrote later that it felt like losing an argument with reality. The numbers were winning. Human error, in this case, did not take the form of a single mistake. It emerged as a pattern of restraint. Oversight layered on oversight. Miscommunication softened into silence. Reluctance disguised as professionalism. No one falsified records. No one ignored an explicit warning. They simply allowed ambiguity to remain unchallenged. And ambiguity has weight. In the cockpit, the captain trusted the cabin reports. The cabin trusted the manifest. The manifest trusted the system that produced it. Each link deferred responsibility to the next. By the time someone realized that the count balancing did not mean it was correct, the moment to intervene had slipped away. This realization did not arrive with clarity. It arrived later, in fragments, in the quiet after landing, in the slow unpacking of events, in the faces of crew members when asked the same question again and again. How many people were on board? They answered with the official number. Then they paused. Then they added, "As far as we know." Families would eventually ask similar questions. Not loudly, not angrily, carefully. They wanted certainty, a firm boundary they could place around their grief. They were given numbers. They were not given peace. Because somewhere between the paperwork and the lived experience of the flight, something had gone unaccounted for. Not a technical failure, a human one. The emotional consequences spread outward. Crew members experienced stress that did not fade with time. Some reported dreams where they counted seats endlessly, always coming up short or long, never matching. One left aviation entirely. Another remained, but avoided certain routes. She never explained why. Professional shame followed them quietly, not because they had caused harm, but because they could not shake the feeling that they had failed to name it when it mattered. "I should have insisted, even if I was wrong." That sentence appears nowhere in the official file. It exists only in testimony. Investigators, too, felt the weight of the imbalance. They examined procedures, audited logs, verified equipment. Everything functioned as designed. That in itself became a problem. If the system worked, then the error had to be human. But no single human action could be isolated as the failure. So the conclusion softened.
Language shifted. Instead of mistake, the reports used irregularity. Instead of missed, they wrote unverified. Instead of wrong, they chose unresolved. These words create distance. They allow everyone involved to step back from the emotional core of the issue. That core is simple and devastating. At some point, the number of people on the plane stopped being something anyone could state with certainty, and no one felt able to stop everything and say so. The count never balanced, really. It only appeared to. And that appearance was enough to carry the flight forward, to complete the journey, to close the doors on questions that would surface too late. This is not a story about hidden passengers or impossible events. It is a story about the limits of verification when it collides with human doubt. About how people trained to maintain order sometimes struggle to confront disorder when it presents itself without clear form. The tragedy lies not in what might have been present or absent. It lies in the realization that something felt wrong, and that feeling was not trusted. Not because the people involved were careless, but because they were careful. Careful not to overreact, careful not to disrupt, careful not to accuse the system of failing. In the end, that care became its own kind of error. Quiet, inessential, irreversible. The count that never balanced did not announce itself with alarms or chaos. It whispered. And by the time anyone understood what the whisper meant, there was nothing left to do but record it and live with it.
When File 004 was sealed, it did not close with a conclusion. It closed with options, possibilities laid out carefully, each one grounded, each one incomplete. Investigators did not chase the extraordinary. They stayed with what could be explained, at least in part by human systems and human error. And yet, none of those explanations fully held. The problem, always, was the seat, the one that appeared and disappeared depending on who was counting, the one that existed on paper but not always in the cabin, the one no one could point to and say with certainty, this is what happened here. Over the years, 3 primary theories emerged. They are not mutually exclusive. They overlap, contradict, and circle one another without settling. Each offers relief. Each leaves something unresolved. Theory 1. Administrative error. This is the simplest explanation. A mistake in ticketing. A duplicated entry. A misaligned seat assignment. A system glitch corrected too late to matter. The evidence supports this possibility. The irregular ticket purchase occurred during a high-volume window. The system in use at the time was known to allow manual overrides. Logs show that corrections were sometimes applied retroactively, leaving traces that appeared inconsistent when reviewed later. Investigators point to the crossed-out entries, the missing attachment referenced in the manifest, the lack of a clear audit trail. All of it fits a familiar pattern. Human beings input data. Human beings make mistakes. If a ticket was issued in error, counted by the system, then nullified quietly once boarding closed, the numbers could appear to balance without reflecting reality inside the cabin. In this version of events, the unease experienced by the crew becomes understandable, the lingering discomfort of professionals sensing inconsistency without knowing its source. It explains the paperwork. It explains the confusion. What it does not explain is the persistence of the feeling. Administrative errors are common. They are discovered, corrected, and forgotten. They do not usually leave trained crew members with memories that trouble them decades later. Nor do they explain the repeated headcounts that felt wrong even when the numbers aligned. For many investigators, this theory feels too neat, too clean for what followed.
Theory 2. The passenger who never boarded. Another explanation suggests that a passenger was counted who was never physically present on the aircraft. Someone scanned in at the gate but did not make it onto the plane. Someone turned back. Someone was delayed and reassigned without the record updating correctly. This happens. Gate scans are not perfect. Boarding bridges are crowded. Distractions are constant. A single missed step can create a discrepancy that propagates through the system. In this scenario, the empty seat in row 14 makes sense. The manifest listed it as occupied because technically it was, on paper. The crew's confusion becomes the result of trusting the boarding confirmation rather than their own observations. There is precedent for this kind of error, documented in other cases. It is mundane. It is procedural. But again, something resists. Multiple crew members independently recalled moments where the count seemed to include too many, not too few, where the discomfort came not from absence but from presence that could not be reconciled. A passenger who never boarded explains an empty seat. It does not explain whispered names. It does not explain perceived resistance in the aisle. It does not explain the sense, reported by more than one person, that something had changed mid-flight. Investigators note this gap carefully. They do not dismiss the theory. They simply acknowledge that it leaves questions behind. Theory 3. The most uncomfortable theory is also the most human. That someone was present who should not have been. Not in a dramatic sense, not maliciously. A simple substitution. Two passengers with similar names. A seat swap not properly recorded. A boarding pass misread in the rush. Airports are places of compression. People funnel through narrow systems designed for speed. Identity is reduced to documents and numbers, checked quickly, trusted implicitly. In rare cases, those systems fail quietly. Investigators considered whether a passenger might have boarded under a wrong identity and disembarked without detection, leaving behind a discrepancy that rippled through the count. This theory accounts for several details: the mismatched name overheard by a passenger, the nervous behavior of one individual, the relief visible when certain passengers were allowed through checkpoints without question. It suggests that the system did what it always does. It assumed correctness until forced to confront otherwise. But this theory carries its own problems. No one came forward. No missing person report matched the circumstances. No identity theft case emerged later to clarify the confusion. If a substitution occurred, it left no external trace, only impressions. And impressions, in formal investigations, are weak currency. Theory 3. The most uncomfortable theory is also the most human. That someone was present who should not have been. Not in a dramatic sense, not maliciously. A simple substitution. Two passengers with similar names. A seat swap not properly recorded. A boarding pass misread in the rush. Airports are places of compression. People funnel through narrow systems designed for speed. Identity is reduced to documents and numbers, checked quickly, trusted implicitly. In rare cases, those systems fail quietly. Investigators considered whether a passenger might have boarded under a wrong identity and disembarked without detection, leaving behind a description.
When File 004 was sealed, it did not close with a conclusion. It closed with options, possibilities laid out carefully, each one grounded, each one incomplete. Investigators did not chase the extraordinary. They stayed with what could be explained, at least in part by human systems and human error. And yet, none of those explanations fully held. The problem, always, was the seat, the one that appeared and disappeared depending on who was counting, the one that existed on paper but not always in the cabin, the one no one could point to and say with certainty, "This is what happened here." Over the years, 3 primary theories emerged. They are not mutually exclusive. They overlap, contradict, and circle one another without settling. Each offers relief. Each leaves something unresolved. Theory 1. Administrative error. This is the simplest explanation. A mistake in ticketing. A duplicated entry. A misaligned seat assignment. A system glitch corrected too late to matter. The evidence supports this possibility. The irregular ticket purchase occurred during a high-volume window. The system in use at the time was known to allow manual overrides. Logs show that corrections were sometimes applied retroactively, leaving traces that appeared inconsistent when reviewed later. Investigators point to the crossed-out entries, the missing attachment referenced in the manifest, the lack of a clear audit trail. All of it fits a familiar pattern. Human beings input data. Human beings make mistakes. If a ticket was issued in error, counted by the system, then nullified quietly once boarding closed, the numbers could appear to balance without reflecting reality inside the cabin. In this version of events, the unease experienced by the crew becomes understandable, the lingering discomfort of professionals sensing inconsistency without knowing its source. It explains the paperwork. It explains the confusion. What it does not explain is the persistence of the feeling. Administrative errors are common. They are discovered, corrected, and forgotten. They do not usually leave trained crew members with memories that trouble them decades later. Nor do they explain the repeated headcounts that felt wrong even when the numbers aligned. For many investigators, this theory feels too neat, too clean for what followed. Theory 2. The passenger who never boarded. Another explanation suggests that a passenger was counted who was never physically present on the aircraft. Someone scanned in at the gate but did not make it onto the plane. Someone turned back. Someone was delayed and reassigned without the record updating correctly. This happens. Gate scans are not perfect. Boarding bridges are crowded. Distractions are constant. A single missed step can create a discrepancy that propagates through the system. In this scenario, the empty seat in row 14 makes sense. The manifest listed it as occupied because technically it was, on paper. The crew's confusion becomes the result of trusting the boarding confirmation rather than their own observations. There is precedent for this kind of error, documented in other cases. It is mundane. It is procedural.
The flight landed. That fact is often overlooked, but it matters. The wheels touched down. The engines reversed. The aircraft slowed, taxied, and reached the gate like any other. Passengers stood, stretched, reached for bags. Overhead compartments opened with familiar clicks. Voices returned, tentative at first, then louder as the spell of shared silence broke. From the outside, nothing appeared wrong. Inside, something had changed. For the families waiting beyond the gate, arrival was ordinary. Embraces, apologies for delays, small jokes about turbulence, promises to call later. No one announced an irregularity. No one asked passengers to remain seated. No one explained that anything had been unusual. People went home. Life resumed. It was only later, sometimes much later, that questions began to surface. Not dramatic ones, careful ones. A spouse noticed an inconsistency in a travel reimbursement form. A family member compared notes and realized a seat assignment did not align with what they remembered. Someone asked for a confirmation that never arrived. The answers were always polite, procedural. We've reviewed the records. Everything appears to be in order. There is no indication of... The sentences trailed off, professionally complete but emotionally empty. For the families, the uncertainty settled slowly. There was no event to grieve, no headline to mark the moment.
only a faint sense that something had slipped sideways, leaving them holding questions that did not belong anywhere official. Some stopped asking, others could not. They wrote letters, they requested transcripts, they asked for clarity that could not be provided. Each response reaffirmed the same conclusion: the numbers balanced. For the crew, the aftermath was quieter and heavier. They completed incident reports, then returned to duty. They flew other routes, worked other cabins, counted other passengers. And yet, File 004 followed them. Not as a document, most never saw it, as a feeling. One attendant described it as a recurring pause during headcounts, a moment where her finger hovered over the last seat, waiting for confirmation that never quite arrived. Another avoided sitting in jump seats near empty rows. A captain requested reassignment to shorter routes, citing fatigue. No one questioned him. Professional environments reward composure. The crew learned to speak of the flight only in approved language. Nothing confirmed, no findings, within acceptable variance. Privately, they spoke differently. They spoke of regret. Not regret for a specific action, but for hesitation itself, for the instinct to wait rather than insist, for trusting that uncertainty would resolve itself if left alone. One former attendant, interviewed years later, paused for a long time before speaking. "I don't think we missed something. I think we noticed it and didn't know how to hold it." That sentence never made it into the file. The airline moved on. It had to. Schedules adjusted, aircraft reassigned, staff rotated, new procedures layered over old ones, each designed to prevent known failures. File 004 was categorized, archived, and referenced only during internal audits. Its lessons, if any, were absorbed indirectly, through cautionary language, through reminders about verification. But the irregularity itself was never addressed publicly. Not because it was dangerous, because it was ambiguous. Organizations struggle with ambiguity. It resists closure. It invites interpretation. It creates liability where none can be clearly assigned. So the file remained sealed. At the airport, gates continued to fill and empty. Coffee shops reopened each morning. Announcements echoed, comforting in their sameness. Thousands of flights passed through without incident. The place forgot. But archives do not forget. They hold. They preserve not only what happened, but what could not be resolved. File 004 sits among others that never found their ending. Its pages have yellowed slightly. The ink has faded just enough to suggest time's passage. The redactions remain. Occasionally, someone new encounters it, an auditor, a researcher, an archivist tasked with inventory. They pause. They notice the missing signature, the crossed-out notes, the imbalance between certainty and testimony. Most close the file and move on. A few linger. Those who linger often report the same thing. Not fear, discomfort. The sense that the case is not asking to be solved, only to be acknowledged. That the people involved did what they could within the limits of their roles and still carried something away with them that never found release. The file does not accuse. It does not demand. It simply exists as a record of a moment when human perception and procedural certainty failed to align, as evidence that not all questions have answers that fit into forms, as a reminder that loss does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the space between numbers. In the end, no one was disciplined. No policy was rewritten in response to this specific case. No memorial was erected. And yet the impact remains, dispersed, intangible, but real. In the way certain crew members still count twice, in the way some families still hesitate before trusting records, in the way investigators speak more softly about what cannot be proven. File 004 remains open in the only way that matters, not officially, emotionally. It is reopened whenever someone remembers a seat that felt occupied and wasn't, whenever a name is spoken that does not appear where it should, whenever certainty is questioned, not out of paranoia,
but out of respect for the limits of knowing. This is where the archive closes its narration, not with resolution, with quiet, the kind that follows unanswered questions, the kind that lingers after routine resumes, the kind that reminds us that some files never truly close, not because they hide a secret, but because they hold a hesitation we are still learning how to name. The folder goes back on the shelf. The label remains unchanged. 004. And somewhere between the pages, a count that never balanced continues to wait, not for discovery, but for acknowledgement. A whisper, preserved, unresolved, and still present.